Piers Morgan, his thing is, his career now seems to be having on people that just painfully school him on issues, but often Israel and the genocide they're perpetrating.
October the 7th, I felt it was on a scale completely unprecedented for one day of slaughter that we have seen in that entire conflict, that it was so barbaric, so medieval, so inhuman in the way it was executed against so many, in the main, young, innocent people.
Now I'm going to let him keep going, and actually Galloway is going to correct him about it's so unprecedented for a single day, but I want to correct him in a different way. He says, oh, it's so unprecedented for a single day. Well, first of all, you've had to move the goalpost to try and come up with a reason that October 7th is worse than what Israel has done on every single day of 270 days of genocide. And so in order to move those goalposts to come up with a way that, no, October 7th is worse than anything Israel's done, he had to say it's unprecedented in a single day, as if the number in the day matters. No, I think the whole number matters. So for Hamas, you've got whatever, 600, 700, maybe less than that, innocent people that were not killed by the IDF on October 7th. Probably less than that, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt. For Israel, you have 40,000 at least. Probably more than that if are lost under the rubble. What does 24 hours matter? He's coming up with some false rubric for why October 7th is worse than anything else. And then on top of that, if you were to subtract the people killed on October 7th by the IDF, which is a lot, you're actually going to get a number that is not the least that's killed in one day. So even by his own standard, it doesn't fit. And then he says it's barbaric, it's medieval. But actually, Israel's genocide is far more barbaric and medieval for the sheer number of children harmed, for the sheer number of just straight up executions. Israel's is far more barbaric, medieval. The cultural destruction, the obliterating of hospitals. I mean, I don't have to go through the whole list, but the number of journalists they've killed. Israel's has been far more atrocious and barbaric, and yet Piers Morgan is trying to say, oh no, that one day was actually way worse than the 270 that have followed it. It's quite a mental gymnastics. I mean, he's got his leg over here mentally, his arm over here, one, he's got his face in his ball sack. The mental twisting and flexibility he had to come up with to try and make it so that October 7th is worse than anything Israel has done is impressive.
Festivals in kibbutzes and so on. That I felt you had to start this debate about what's going on with a clear denunciation of what happened that day. Then the question for me became twofold. The scale of Israel's response and what was proportionate. I didn't have that answer. I said I would see how it played out and make an assessment. And secondly, what was the end game and what would happen the day after the war ends? And on those second and third points, I have grown increasingly critical of what Israel's been doing.
Oh, so he condemns everything Hamas did on October 7th, but now he's critical. I've grown critical. It just took 270 days of genocide for me to grow a little critical. If during the Holocaust you were talking to someone about the Holocaust, about Auschwitz, and they said, I've grown a little critical, would you think that was enough? Would you think that was okay? Okay, as long as you're critical.
Particularly since they began attacking a refugee camp in Rafah where they've been sending everybody.
I love that that's his line. Oh, they were attacking yeah, that is horrific. So was the bombing of hospitals. The refugee, that's the one. What about the bombing of hospitals? What about the shooting of people who went to an aid truck to try and get food? Was that not your line? That wasn't okay. What about the regular, and I mean daily bombing of people in their house with their family? Israel would use this AI program to say, hey, that guy made 3 phone calls from 3 different phones. It couldn't be that he's a journalist or something else. It must mean that he's Hamas. So we're going to murder him, but we're not just going to murder him. We're going to wait till he gets into his family home, and then we're going to blow up his whole family. And a lot of Palestinians, they live, 3 generations in a home. So we're going to kill all of his cousins and his kids and his grandparents and parents and everyone we could come up with is all going to die in that single blast. And that's how we'll do it. That was not a red line for Piers Morgan. It was just when they moved on to the Rafah refugee camp. Interesting. Surprised you waited till then, huh? By the way, I also should have said before I started here, because I know some of you don't know every one of these things. George Galloway is currently a member of parliament in the UK. Also, he is somewhat of a buddy of mine now. and I was just on his show yesterday. Anyway, he's always very kind to me. And by the way, George Galloway is old school defending the rights of Palestinians. He was beat up. He says beaten nearly to death, has had such a scar on his scalp from the beating that that's when he started wearing the hat. And this was, I think, maybe late 90s or early 2000s. And he was beaten by someone who was beating him for calling for free Palestine, for criticizing Israel. And that person had an IDF t-shirt on when he assaulted him. That doesn't mean the guy was IDF, but it means he supported him. And after the guy who served a certain amount of time in prison, I don't remember if it was a year or 2 years or something, for beating him, and I believe he was an MP at the time, so I believe he was in parliament at the time, that guy who beat him flew to Israel and was given a hero's welcome, and probably lives in Israel to this day.
And I thought that excuse of we're trying to be targeted to Hamas when it's clear that you can't be targeted when you attack a refugee camp, I thought crossed the line for me, but also cognizant of two things. One, Israel's right to defend itself and a duty to defend itself after the scale of what happened. And because...
And of course, that's a bullshit term. Most of you know that the whole Israel has a right to defend itself. Well, first of all, technically by UN law, you don't have a right to defend yourself against people in your own country. And technically, Gaza is a refugee camp because Israel has stolen all of that land. So they have no country. So therefore, these are people that have been locked in a refugee camp by Israel. So you can't defend yourself against occupied people, just according to the UN stance. On top of that, you'll notice only Israel ever defends itself. That's all they ever do. Everything they do is defending itself. If they, tortured someone, they defend tortured that person. If they blew up a hospital, they defend blew up that hospital. And it's all defending itself. Whereas anything Hamas does or anything Palestinians do, and there's Palestinians in the West Bank as well, anything they do, that's not defending. That's all aggression, right? That's all terrorism. That's aggression. They never defend themselves. It's interesting.
The Hamas spokesman said we're going to keep doing it. But secondly, that uniquely in Gaza, half of the population of 2 million are under 18. Mm-hmm. This is a place that is jam-packed with children. Mm-hmm. And when Hamas embed themselves among civilians, as they do...
Well, where else could they embed themselves?
It's
a prison camp.
I accept that, and I'll come to that part of it. I'm sure there will be many parts of this debate where you and I will agree.
He's doing this trick where he does this rant, and there's a million falsehoods in it. There's a million factually inaccurate parts, and George Galloway is expected to just sit there and let him do it. It's so many falsehoods. Like, Galloway would have to be taking notes to undo all of the falsehoods in this statement by Piers Morgan.
And I still have no evidence that there's any endgame plan by Israel. And I think you're now seeing the Israeli government fracturing, with people recognizing there is no after-the-war plan, and it could be complete and utter chaos.
There's no after-the-war plan because the war, it's not a war. The actual plan of this is ethnic cleansing. The actual plan is genocide. So you don't come up with a plan for after genocide. You just kill everyone. That seems to be what, Israel has given all signals to that being their aim.
There are certainly people on that cabinet, I think, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and others, who have been talking in a genocidal way about this. But I've started a lot of interviews with pro-Palestinian guests, and I'll do it with you. And it's been a sort of controversial thing. People have sort of mocked me for it, but I kind of think it's a good starting point. To go back to October the 7th, when you realize the scale of what had happened that day, do you condemn what happened that day?
And George Galloway is going to answer here in a second, but I just want to say, Piers Morgan does start almost every interview with someone who's calling this a genocide, defending Palestinians' right to exist. He starts almost every interview by saying, do you condemn Hamas? No one's asked him, apparently, do you condemn Israel? And he'll say, well, I'm critical of Israel. No, do you condemn Israel? But on top of that, no matter the answer of the person, and, George Galloway's given a lot of time to speak here, whereas often the person's only on for 5 minutes. And if Piers Morgan starts every interview like that, then that means every interview, most of the time, is wasted on, will you condemn Hamas? Why won't you? Why will you? Whatever. And it's stuck in that debate so that they don't actually get to the genocide. They don't actually get to what Israel's doing. They just are in a loop of, will you condemn Hamas?
Well, I have to first correct you on something. It was by no means the single biggest slaughter in the Israel-Palestine chapter.
In one day?
In one day. In fact, in 5 hours.
He has to add in his bizarre little goalpost that he has put up. In 24 hours. I meant in 24 hours. Because that matters.
With Sharon on the roof shining a searchlight into the Sabra and Shatila camps in Beirut. 3,850 Palestinian women and children. There were only women and children because the men had all agreed to sail away to Tunisia as part of an American brokered deal. Now, younger viewers will not remember Sabra and Shatila, but those two names are burned in the minds of those older and who care about it. So that's triple the actual death toll on October the 7th.
Well, nearly 7,000 more were wounded on October the 7th.
Yeah, but the fact that you thought...
Now he's got to add in things. Well, let's talk about the wounded, too. That's not what you said. You didn't say wounded. You said murdered.
In this respectfully, that this was the biggest single day of slaughter is part of the problem. The lives, the blood...
Exactly. Piers Morgan is part of the problem. The ignorance of what is going on here is part of the problem. And Piers Morgan spouts that ignorance on a near daily basis.
Of Palestinians is oftentimes by commentators and politicians regarded as less valuable than the blood of Israelis. All the blood is a disgrace, all of it. And insofar as terrorist acts are committed by Palestinian organizations, by terrorists I mean the harming, killing of innocent civilians, of course I condemn that.
So do you accept, on that then, do you accept, because the number you gave for the other atrocity, which is what it was, is disputed. You know it's disputed.
The Sabra Shatila?
Yeah, the actual...
Well,
Piers Morgan says it's disputed. Well, if it was 3,000, what did he say? George Galloway said like 3,800. Okay, let's say it's disputed. It was actually 3,100. It's still way more. It's still triple the total number killed on October 7th, and that counts the number that were killed by the IDF.
Well, the death toll on October 7th is...
Well, I know you disputed, but that, more clarity about the numbers on that.
No, there isn't, because the Israeli media reports have not been reflected in Western reports. But the Israeli media all the time reports that significant casualties were inflicted by Israeli forces themselves, and deliberately under Netanyahu's Hannibal directive, which states that no one should be allowed to be taken hostage, kill them, rather than allow them to be taken hostage.
But over 230 were taken hostage.
Yeah.
And Piers Morgan skips the Hannibal directive discussion immediately, skips the fact that the IDF killed a lot of their own people, skips the fact that the IDF killed God knows how many, skips the fact that all the cars from the Nova Music Festival, hundreds I read, were shredded and buried in an undisclosed location because people would have seen that there were bullet holes in the roofs of those cars. And is it roofs or roofs? I guess it's roofs. Bullet holes in the roofs of those cars because that would be coming from a helicopter. Who had the helicopters? Fucking IDF. You know, he skips over all that and just jumps to, but Hamas did. Hamas did. But Hamas.
And taking women.
And the latest figures are that 1,143 people were killed in the initial series of terror attacks, 373 of whom were linked to security forces, 766 of whom were civilians. Now, you've questioned those before. Do you question those now?
No, I question who killed whom, but I don't eschew condemnation of the killing of innocent civilians. I absolutely condemn that. I also condemn the taking of women and children as hostages, whether they're taken by the Israeli government, and there are 9,000 hostages in Israeli dungeons.
Thank you, George Galloway. He's the first person I have seen, now maybe the second, maybe low-key or someone did it before. I have been going on and on about this for a while, but he's the first person on a mainstream show I've seen mention that Israel has thousands of hostages. He said 9,000. I often say 10,000. It's tough to say to know the exact number because Israel will often black bag these people, grab them up, and you don't know where they went. So it is tough to know the exact number, but all estimates say there were 5,000 before October 7th, and that Israel has probably doubled that number since. This is such an important fact that should be said over and over again, and you cannot find it in mainstream media almost at all.
Are untried, not even charged. They're just held there as hostages. And I condemn the holding of civilian hostages.
Do you think what Hamas did that day was a terrorist attack?
Well, the parts that I'm talking about were undoubtedly a terrorist attack. But if
you see, I think, look, I wasn't expecting you to say that. And the reason I think it's significant.
There we go. I wasn't expecting you to say that because that's my gotcha. I have nothing else. I have no other way to defend this genocide except to say, you won't condemn terrorism. Gotcha. That should be the new name of the show. You won't condemn terrorism. Gotcha. That's all it is. It's all it is. And he literally just said, I wasn't expecting you to say that. And all of my notes are just trying to make you debate that point with me. And my agreement is with Galloway's way of stating it. It's like, I don't support killing of innocent civilians. I have often said that a lot of what went down on October 7th, we don't know the numbers of. We don't know how many IDF killed. We do know IDF killed a lot of them. We do know that Hamas killed innocent people. We also know that almost everyone in Israel serves, I hate that word, almost everyone in Israel has been in the military or is currently in the military or at some point has been in the military. So therefore, a lot of them have guns and a lot of them are military trained. Whether the guy was at, whether someone running at a Palestinian on October 7th is running at them with a gun could be technically go down as an innocent civilian. And yet it was a military veteran running at them with a gun. So they were firing back. There's no doubt of that. But their goal, as we've seen in many statements, as Hamas has said, was to take hostages. And their goal was to take roughly 200 to 250 hostages. Of course, there were a lot of firefights. And of course, a lot of people were killed. But it does not seem like it was their goal to walk in and just execute people, unless they were actual IDF. And they did go into some of the IDF bases and execute people. But anyway, I agree with the way that Galloway is stating it.
George, is a lot of people are sat in that chair on the Palestinian side of this debate, and they have including Jeremy Corbyn, I might add, who have resolutely refused to condemn what Hamas did that day. And I find that very difficult to get past.
Well,
I've often...
Piers Morgan, because he did not know that George Galloway was going to say, I condemn executing innocent people, he went ahead and gave his argument anyway. He goes, I wouldn't expect you to say that. So let me argue with Jeremy Corbyn, who's not here. Let me argue with other people who I've brought on who aren't here. Like, legit, Piers Morgan has nothing because of what he thought George Galloway was going to say.
I've ended up with 20-minute debates, as I did with Corbyn about it, because I don't see how any human being cannot tell that what it is.
Killing innocent civilians, whether on London Bridge or on the London Underground or at a music festival, are terrorist acts, because they are punishing innocent people for the crimes of guilty people. Now, I was underground as an agent of the ANC in apartheid South Africa. I was working for Nelson Mandela's ANC. I gave my blood on the floor of the Guguletu police station in Cape Town. Was the ANC a terrorist organization? The answer to that is no, even though they had people who carried out terrorist attacks. You have to understand the whole picture.
So I'm going to wrap it up there, but that's a great point about the ANC, about Nelson Mandela. There were parts of the group that committed terrorist acts because they viewed it as the way to achieve change. And as he's saying, he condemned terrorist acts then, but he does not view the entire group that Nelson Mandela was a leader of as a terrorist organization. And, the same for those fighting for Irish freedom. This is basically what Piers Morgan does, is he has on people to debate. They run circles around him and make him look like a pro-genocide idiot. And yet that's his career. His career is now based on that, apparently. I will say I'm glad he's having on people I appreciate and people I'm friends with, like George Galloway, Abby Martin, Low Key, and others. It is sad that he has to keep pushing, Cornel West he had on, that he has to keep pushing these pro-Israel, pro-genocide talking points, even as he does his little equivocating. I am critical of certain things that Israel has done, not the blowing up of hospitals. Fine with that. Love that. Big fan. Longtime fan blowing up hospitals. But don't like the refugee camps. Leave those alone.